Sorry about that. So on behalf of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, I would like to welcome you to the Manila launch of the 2012 Economic and Social Survey of Asia and the Pacific. We are still waiting for Mr. Doronila, our guest reactor, but I think that we can already start. So, for starters, what better way to welcome you than a video message from the Undersecretary General of the United Nations, as well as the Executive Secretary of UNESCAP in Bangkok. Here it is.
For the global launch of the 2012 Economic and Social Survey of Asia and the Pacific, produced by ESCAP, the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. The Asia region continues to face a challenging external environment, which is why the focus of the 2012 survey is to map the landscape to help steer through turbulence and volatility. The survey identifies major risks, but also presents analysis to inform policy agendas for shared and sustainable growth. I would like to highlight three aspects from the survey. The first is the threat posed to Asia-Pacific growth by the weakness of major developed economies. The V-shaped recovery from the depths of the 2008 global financial crisis proved to be short-lived. The world economy entered the second stage of the crisis in 2011 due to the Eurozone debt crisis and continued uncertain economic outlook of the US economy. Our forecast is that persistent headwinds will bring regional growth down to 6.5% this year from 7% in 2011. The high cost of capital and reduced demand for regional exports, combined with loose monetary policies and trade protection measures of some advanced economies, contributes to the slowing of Asian Pacific growth in 2012. Despite the slowdown, growth in Asia and the Pacific remains better than in any other region, continuing as an anchor of stability and a new growth pole for the world economy. South-South trade with Asia-Pacific in 2012 will help other developing regions, such as Africa and Latin America, further reduce their dependence on low-growth developed economies. A second key aspect of the survey is the challenge presented to Asia and the Pacific by commodity price volatility and especially the trend of rising commodity prices. High prices and persistent volatility are likely to become the new normal of the global economy. This commodity boom presents risks and opportunities. Price shifts will alter incentives. But the message from the survey is that less developed economies should resist the impulse towards commodity specialization, which in turn can delay industrialization, economic diversification, and the building of productive capacities. The third aspect of the survey highlights critical policy challenges and options for Asia-Pacific countries, including managing the balance between growth and inflation, using several inflation-fighting measures beyond monetary policies alone, coping with capital flows, and dealing with considerable exchange rate volatility, addressing jobless growth and unemployment by encouraging domestic consumption to act as an enhanced engine of growth and productivity, improving working conditions and income equality. Turbulence and volatility generates uncertainty. The survey provides a valuable tool to pursue a sustainable path for shared prosperity in Asia-Pacific amidst the new normal of uncertainty.
Okay, that was Dr. Noeline Hazer, Executive Director of ESCAP. So let's get on with the program. I would like to introduce the first speaker. There will be two presenters today. One, Mr. Sudip Basu, to present the major findings of the survey, and Dr. Amador to concentrate on aspects of the Philippine economy relevant to the survey. The CVs of our speakers are found on the left sleeve of your press kit, so I will not read all of the information there. I will just introduce them briefly. So Dr. Sudip Basu currently serves as an Economic Affairs Officer of the Macroeconomic Policy and Development Division of UNESCAP in Bangkok. Prior to this UN assignment in Bangkok, he was an Associate Economic Affairs Officer of the International Trade Division in the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, or UNCTAD, in Geneva. So may I bring you Dr. Basu.
Good morning, everyone, especially the friends from our media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me today to come here in Manila to launch the UN survey for Asia and the Pacific. As you all know that you will get a copy of this document, which we call this year the special title, Pursuing Shared Prosperity in the Era of Turbulence and High Commodity Prices. So what I want to do here briefly to give you some of the major findings of the survey, and then Dr. Amando will go through some specific aspects of the Philippines economy. So today, on the 10th May, we are launching the survey in 33 different locations all around the world, from Geneva, New York, to Beirut, Addis Ababa, and also 27 different locations right now all across Asia Pacific. As the Executive Secretary already talked about the current situation in the Asia Pacific in her video message, what I want to tell you that yes, right now we are facing some challenges in our region. What we expect from what is happening right now in the developed countries, especially in the Eurozone areas, and also some uncertainty in the US economy. So given all of that, what we project for the Asia Pacific, developing Asia Pacific, is 6.5% growth in 2012, which was a cut of about 0.5 percentage points since 2011 growth rate, which was about 7%. And what you also see that this is mostly this growth prospects, the decline in the growth prospects for the region, for the developing Asia-Pacific region, is mostly because of, as I mentioned, the Eurozone debt crisis and the continued uncertainty in the US are the major cause of this, growth decline, as well as the high and volatile commodity prices, especially the oil prices that I'll go through very briefly later on in the presentation. So what you can see here clearly that in the region is of course not doing as good as it used to, but still this is the growth pole. India and China are the real growth centers of the region, and you can see that for example also across the different sub-regions in the Asia Pacific, the Southeast Asia, where Philippines it is among one of the countries, we're expecting about 5.2% growth in 2012. 2012, and other sub-regions such as the Pacific Islands is about 5.7%. So in different sub-regions are actually experiencing different sets of uncertainties given this challenging situation right now in the region. One thing that we have in terms of the I just open the next slide. In terms of the specific country level information, for our own growth forecast, for example, for Philippines, we are forecasting 4.8% for 2012, which is considerably lower if you remember the year 2010 when you had about 7.6% growth in that year, and that really made a lot of positive impacts to the economic and social prosperity in the country. But for certain reasons, especially the export decline last year also caused some uncertainty in the economic growth of the Philippines, because it's very much linked to the major developed countries like the European countries and also the US. In terms of the inflation forecast, what we're saying for the region, that it's likely to soften to 4.8% to compare to 6.1% that you have in 2011. So the inflation is not really a major concern right now for the region. Similarly, for Philippines as well, we are projecting 3.7% inflation on an annual basis for the year 2012, which was about 4.8% last year. So again, inflation is not a major concern for the country as a whole. But as we in the report are talking about the different downside risk, and specifically we're talking about two risks here. One is the Eurozone debt crisis. As you know that there are some specific problems at many of the member countries in the Eurozone, and we're expecting that if there are some further disorderly debt default to some of the countries, then we can expect to have a decline of about 1.3 percentage GDP decline from the baseline, and at the same time, we're also expecting that given the region's closeness, interconnectedness with the Eurozone areas, the export may decline to about 390 billion US dollars. Of course, with this crisis, Eurozone crisis, if it really goes into the disorderly default, we're also expecting that about 14 million people in the region will not be able to come out of the poverty for 2012 and 2013. So this is a major source of concern for the region as well. Specifically for Philippines, what we're expecting that if there is any disorderly default in the Eurozone areas, then for Philippines we're expecting a decline of 0.7 to 0.8 percentage point of the GDP growth for the next year for 2012 and 2013. The second downward side risk is about the oil price crisis. As you know that there are some instability in the region, some of the oil producing countries. And what we're expecting that if the oil price increases by $25 per barrel, then also there will be some additional difficulties in terms of the growth, and also it can have a negative impact on the inflation as well. For example, to be very specific with Philippines, we're expecting that if it increases by $25 per barrel, the GDP growth can decline to about 1.3 percentage point of GDP, and also there will be some negative impacts also on inflation, and inflation can actually increase in that case. So we listed about 6 policy challenges, short-term policy challenges, medium-term policy challenges, and long-term policy challenges. And for each of those challenges, we are providing some policy prescriptions as well. The first short-term challenge we're talking about is the managing the growth and inflation balance in the region. As we mentioned in the report, that there are some rooms for fiscal and monetary responses, because many of the countries in the region, they have a healthy fiscal balance, and also their possibility of monetary easing. So these are the good side of the current scenario for our growth forecast for the Asia-Pacific region. So that means there may be possibility of some further stimulus packages in the region, but still we have to always keep an eye regarding the inflation targeting, as well as the growth forecast for the region as a whole. The second policy challenge you're talking about is the capital flows in the region. As you know that there are some uncertainties regarding the outflows of some of the short-term investment from the region. And we need to be well aware of that, and we also need to have some specific policies, capital control policies, to make sure that we keep an eye on that kind of a capital inflows, because what we have noticed over the last couple of years or so, that given this uncertainties in the investors' mind, the sentiments is still very fragile. What we have noticed that there is this inflow and outflow of this capital, especially the short-term capital, which can actually create some further difficulties for the investors, especially countries like here in Philippines or many other countries, developing countries in the region. So we have to keep an eye on as to how to cope with the capital flows in the region. The third policy challenge is a very important one, which has also an important implication for the region as a whole, is that the jobless recovery. As the Executive Secretary already mentioned in a video speech, that even though we have seen that the region is growing, but still the job growth is not enough for the region, okay, because of the demographic changes. We need to really make sure that the youth get proper opportunities for employment, because what we have noticed that in the region, the youth unemployment is about 3 times than the general unemployment rate in the region. And of course, we have also seen that over 1 billion workers in the vulnerable employment sector in the region. So, and especially in the case of Philippines, the data shows that the unemployment issue is an important policy concern, and how to keep that with the job growth should be something that the policymakers needs to look into. The next one is again, of course, very much related to the jobless growth, because we're really talking about here the rising income and social inequalities in the region. In the report, we mentioned that the inequality index to measure the income inequality, we actually increased on an average from 32 to 38% the last decade or so, and that is an important issue for the policymakers and needs to tackle properly. And also in the case of Philippines, we have noticed that the level is still very, very high. And apart from the income inequality, another aspect also we discussed in the report is about the social development. In the case of the whole region, we have seen, if you really take into account this inequality, the social development actually can reduce from say 10 to 30% on an average, depending on different countries. So inequality remains an important issue even for social development. In the case of Philippines, we estimate that the social achievement can actually potentially reduce to about 14%. What we call the loss in social development, given the inequality in the country, can be about 14% according to our estimates. And Southeast Asia in general, we're estimating about 20% social development, potential loss in the social development, given the rising inequality in the region. Another very important issue we are looking into the all of you are really aware of what's happened last year because of storm, the typhoons and the floods. So this is very much part of the policymakers, day and night, discussion. So what also we discuss in the report that how we can manage this disaster's risk. Our estimates show that last year, the loss and damage in total of the region is about $267 billion. And it has also very much implication given that there is a lot of supply chains that we see where also Philippines is very much part of, given the automobile industry and the electronics industries. And if you see that when the tsunami and the earthquake hit in Japan last year in March, immediately you'll see the impact on Philippines' production automobile industry, which declined to about 24%, and then electronic components related production also declined by more than 17.5%. So what we did is talking about in the survey that we have to make sure that we prepare ourselves properly with some policies and other cooperation mechanism across the different governments in the region, so that we can prepare ourselves properly and reduce the risk and loss and damages, both human lives and the economic cost as well. So this is a very important issue which we talked about in the survey. In terms of medium-term challenges, we have two very specific issues that we have dealt with in the report. One is as to how to balance our economic growth, to make sure that this is more inclusive and it's much more broad-based and in terms of quality of growth, it is much more pro-poor. So in terms of the policies that we are talking about in the medium term, is that we need to increase the inclusiveness of growth by providing quality public service delivery, infrastructure investment. We also need to look into the agricultural development by providing much more research and development, providing new investment opportunities in the agro-business. So agriculture sector should be given enough attention and to make sure that we increase our agriculture production. The other important issue we talked about is the green economy. As you know that the UN Conference on Sustainable Development will be held in Rio in a couple of months' time, and we're really talking about the UN's development agenda for the next decade or so. And in that, we're talking about how to support the green economy, because in the green economy, you're talking about having a good balance of economic, social, and environmental issues. Right, so we need to have a good balance of all these different sectors in a way, and also we need good PPP here, public-private partnership in this case as well, so that we can have much more low-cost access to technology for many of these developing and low-income countries in the region. And fourthly, we're talking about exploiting a potential regional economic cooperation. I can inform you that in a week's time, back in Bangkok, we'll be discussing this at the Regional Commission, and the theme study of this year is about the going together, how to improve our connectivity, how to improve our regional cooperation integration among the countries in Asia Pacific. So of course Philippines will be an important stakeholder in that discussion, and we need to talk about that again when you talk about the medium-term challenges for the region. Another issue is, of course, about how the region can take its responsibilities, right? Because we're really growing faster compared to any other continents, any other developing regions in the world, and we need to also make sure that we take responsibility, and also we have our voices heard in many of the international institutions, especially the financial institutions. So in that case, what you're talking about, to have a development-friendly global economic environment and governance. And especially, we need to make sure that the developed world, they have fiscal consideration so that we can have a revival of growth and employment opportunities. Also, there should not be a creation of excess liquidity, but because in the developed countries, if you create excess liquidity, that can have an influence, an impact, sometimes through asset price bubbles and many other sectoral implications in the developing countries, especially in Asia Pacific. We also need to talk about how to have reduced volatility of the oil and then the food prices, and most importantly, in the case of international financial architecture, we need to make sure that the region, gets its voice heard in institutions like IMF and in the World Bank, and also in a region like in the ADB, so that the finances can be sort of taken place in a way to make sure that the growth is inclusive for the region as well. And also, there are some new forums, as you know, like G20 forum. There are about 8 countries, I believe, in the region which are part of that, but still many countries are missing in the region, so we need to make sure that they are part of the story as well. Maybe the low-income countries are not part of the G20, so UN is providing a platform, and ESCAP back in Bangkok, we are having a consultation to make sure that region position can be properly reflected in the outcome document of G20, and also summits like BRICS, for example, where you have India, China, and Russia from the region. So also we need to make sure that we have a good cooperation and then have a healthy and development-friendly global governance. Finally, I want to very briefly touch upon the long-term challenge, which is also a special chapter in our survey related to the high commodity prices. What we're saying, living with high commodity prices. What we have noticed in general that since 2000 there is not only volatile commodity prices but also high commodity prices, and that has, as I mentioned in the case of oil price increase, can have a very much negative implications to the growth prospects and inflation, which actually impacts really the poor and the vulnerable of the region and countries like Philippines as well. So this is an important issue. We need to look into it, and how to make sure that we take proper policy actions in this regard. Especially what we are really talking about here is there are 3 sets of countries what we have identified in the report. One is the catching up countries, the second one is commodity boom countries, and third one is aspiring countries. The catching up countries are those countries where you see they've already reached a certain stage of income and also diversification of the economic structure. In the case of commodity boom, they are basically those countries in Central Asia, and like countries like Iran, Indonesia, they're experiencing a lot of positive what we call a boon, the blessing, the bonus, given that the energy price rise over the last years or so, and that is why they are really experiencing a lot of revenue gains out of that. But in future, for the sustainability of economic growth, we believe that this is not the way. They need to diversify their economic structure as well, and they need to also make sure that the revenues can be used for productive capacity development and infrastructure building. Another set of countries we also discuss in the report is that of aspiring countries, that they need to still do a lot because there are still lot of possibilities for those countries to diversify both in terms of their production structure and also in terms of the competitiveness of their industry. And the Philippines is one of the countries that we categorize as a part of aspiring countries. And we talked about that in some detail if you look in our policy briefs, and there are some specific recommendations that we also come up with, and if you wish we can have in the question answer we can discuss about it. So what we're really talking about in general is about this the policy recommendations for almost all these groups of countries, because there is no space for thinking that look, we have been diversifying, we've been developing, but there are no much opportunities. We have to really continue our efforts to make sure that there is this industrialization going on, innovation is taking place, and to make sure that there is diversification and competitiveness for our industries in the region. So what we are really saying in this report is about sharing our prosperity. region-wise. So it's not that the growth poles like China, India, Russia, they're going to get benefits. What we really want to make sure that this growth really trickles down to many other countries, many other the low-income developing countries as well. And for that, as I mentioned, that we have some difficulties right now for 2012 and 2013 outlook because of this external economic climate, but also we have some positives because the interregional trade is really increasing. As you know, in the case of Asia Pacific in total, it increased to about to 54% in 2011. And same time, in the case of Philippines, what we also have seen that the Philippines' reliance on its export to many of developed countries also declined. And so this is a very important signal that the country is sort of connecting with the other regional partners. So these are some of the good things that we also mentioned, as we call the positive sides. And of course, we need to continuously look for new opportunities in the region, for connectivity, for new opportunities for financing, new opportunities for making sure that we engage with discussions with other regional and stakeholders, and UN is always there to make sure to provide that policy advice and also the forum for engaging in discussions. So right now, as we're saying, that we need to really build a region with a development path that really provides opportunities, for the poor and the vulnerable to come and to make sure that they're also part of the growth story. And there are a lot of positivities in the region, and we believe that even though there are some challenges, we have to always be aware of those challenges. But at the same time, that we need to work together for this shared prosperity. And I think that if we continue to do that, there'll be, it will be really what we call the 21st century belongs to Asia and the Pacific region. I thank you so much, and later on I'll be really happy to take up questions from the media. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Basu. I would like to introduce now our next speaker, Dr. Maria C. Tuano-Amador, heads the Monetary Policy Subsector, which oversees the operations and functions of 4 core departments in the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, namely the Department of Economic Research, the Department of Economic Statistics, the Center for Monetary and Financial Policy, and the Economic and Financial Learning Center. She is a member of the advisory committee that recommends the monetary policy stance of the Monetary Board, as well as the Financial Stability Committee of the BSP. She represents the bank in various international and regional meetings, as well as in various local interagency committees. Dr. Amador was seconded by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas as Senior Advisor to the Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund from 2003 to 2006. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Amador.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Isang magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. If you don't mind, I'll probably just do my discussion by sitting down. I think over the next 15 minutes, I intend to discuss with you what I consider to be the Philippine economic narrative. And in fact, in the very first frame, you'll see that I posed a question there. Can the Philippine economy indeed rev up or gear up to higher than cruising speed? And I will attempt to answer that question at the end of the presentation. So my presentation will consist of 4 parts. First, I'll look at very briefly, because Dr. Basu did such a good job in discussing the global economic environment. So what is the global economic environment that the Philippine economy is operating under? Second, what are the competitive strengths? Third, as we look at the competitive strengths, we also need to look at the challenges and risks that the Philippine economy is facing. And finally, how should policy respond in the face of it all? So very briefly on the growth economic outlook, if you look at what's happening to the global economy, it seems that we're in a wild roller coaster drive. with many ups and also many downs. And I guess amidst this very challenging roller coaster global economy, very steady nerves and steady hands are needed. So you all know that a number of shocks hit the global economy in 2011, and you can easily read them before you. And in fact, not only the UNESCAP, but also the IMF and other multilateral institutions are projecting a mild slowdown in global growth in 2012. Not only will global growth moderate, it is also expected to continue to be uneven, with the advanced economies growing at a considerably slower rate than the emerging economies. And because growth is uneven and because growth is multi-speed, it is expected to be fragile. Amidst all of this, we also think that because of what's happening in Europe, where the problem seems to be intensifying, the financial markets will continue to experience significant volatility. So what we call the risk-on, risk-off dynamics, which could have important implications on the financial markets in emerging economies, including the Philippines. Now, let's go now to the second part of the Philippine narrative, which is looking precisely on what's happening to the Philippine economy. What are the competitive strengths of the Philippine economy? Or putting it another way, ano ba yung mga cushions, or what are the buffers that can help the economy absorb the shocks emanating from outside? And we can identify a number of these buffers. First is the country's sound macroeconomic fundamentals. Inflation is low, and there's fiscal policy space to help prop up the economy. The fiscal accounts, I'll discuss it a little bit later, is in relatively good shape. Second, we all know that while external demand has slowed down considerably in 2011, domestic demand is the main driver of the Philippine economy. The Philippines can capitalize on what they call the dividends coming from favorable demographic dynamics. The Philippine population is young, it's educated, and it's also economically active. I'll quickly qualify my statement that while there is the fruits of economic developments or demographic dynamics that we can capitalize, this must be married with opportunities, with potential to increase the productive capacity of our population. The third source of resilience, or a third source of cushion against these global economic shocks, would be the comfortable external payments position of the Philippine economy. And I'll walk you through that. Those points. And finally, the Philippines, including the Philippine banking system, is reaping the dividends of or the fruits of previous structural reforms. It works on and off, so please forgive me for that. Now, so let's look a little bit more carefully on the homegrown, what I call them the homegrown sources of resilience. Indeed, growth was quite strong in 2010 at more than 7%, but it slowed down a bit in 2011 to 3.7%, particularly reflecting the marked slowdown in the export performance of the economy, and also because government spending slowed down a bit, in part because some operational processes, some operational kinks were sorted out. But however, I'd like to quickly add that 3.7% growth in 2011 amidst a very challenging global economic environment remains to be quite respectable. Consumption is a key boost, or was a key boost to the Philippine economy, and this was supported by low inflation and also low interest rates. In fact, inflation is averaging at around 3% in the first quarter of 2012, lower than the midpoint of the inflation target range of 3 to 5%. And importantly, too, inflation is projected to remain low in 2013 as well as 2014, which is the policy horizon of the Bangko Sentral. And attesting to the fact of good inflation prints, the Bangko Sentral has in fact reduced policy rates twice in 2012, once in March and again another time once in January and again in March. And stable prices as well as low interest rates should be supportive of consumption and investment, therefore again supporting domestic drivers of growth. You know, the Philippines, the Bangko Sentral in particular, is very attentive to inflation dynamics. And why is that? If you look at the chart before you, you'll find that the share of food in the CPI basket is considerably high, much higher in fact than in other countries. So food inflation does hit us quite hard, and also energy. Energy inflation consists or fuel as well as electricity prices constitute about 10%, close to 10% of the commodity basket that we monitor for inflation purposes. And so why are we concerned? Why are we very attentive and very vigilant to inflation dynamics? It's because it could erode purchasing power, and we know that the poor gets hurt more than any particular sector when inflation is high, and also it could force policy tightening for some central banks. Effectively, higher prices could complicate the trade-offs between sustaining low interest rates in order to support growth and also keeping inflation low. Now, with respect to the external payments dynamics, the country's external payments position remains to be quite favorable. In fact, we've seen a rebound in exports in January and February, and in part this is driven by the upturn in the IT cycle. We've been seeing some strength in the semiconductor cycle. Remittances also, as well as business process outsourcing and also tourism receipts, have continued to provide fundamental support, fundamental buffers in the external payments position of the country. As a result, the gross or the foreign exchange reserves of the country has now risen to $76 billion. And how will you appreciate this number? You will appreciate this if you consider this in the context of the number of months of imports of goods and services that the international reserves can purchase. Very briefly, our reserves now can cover close to one year's supply of imports of goods and services, or putting it another way, our reserves now can cover our short-term external debt more than 7 times over if you look at the residual maturity of short-term debt. There has also been a material improvement in the external debt dynamics of the country, where it used to be that external debt as a share of GDP was running at close to 60%, it is now at less than 30%. Moreover, the share of long-term debt continues to be the primary component of external debt. Short-term external debt accounts for less than 10% of total external debt. Additionally, for every dollar of exports that the Philippines has been taking in, where we used to spend about 13 cents to a dollar to service the debt, we are now only using 9 cents to a dollar for external debt payments. The bank, amidst very tough conditions too, the Philippine banking system has remained broadly sound and stable. It is an efficient intermediary of funds between surplus and borrowing units. It continues to, deposit mobilization continues to be strong. The asset quality of the banking system also has continued to improve, with the non-performing loan ratio, in fact, going down to levels which were not seen even prior to the Asian financial crisis. The capital adequacy ratio also continues to be strong, providing fundamental support against the inevitable shocks to the system. Importantly too, Dr. Basu talked about the possibility that the European external debt situation could turn even more favorable. But when we look at the exposure of the Philippine banking system to the Eurozone, we think that they remain manageable and in fact modest, and therefore we do not see any fundamental disruptions in external liquidity and even in domestic liquidity. So should the economy gather steam and pick up pace, should economic growth pick up pace, we think that ample credit is available to fuel or to lubricate the economy's liquidity requirements. On the fiscal front, we also think that the fiscal purse has the flexibility to raise spending on both social and economic priorities. And in fact, that is the plan. If you look at the plan for the fiscal program, you'll see that the fiscal deficit is expected to be around 2.6 to 3%. And this is on the basis of stronger or higher spending for both infrastructure as well as for social priorities. The government is also particularly mindful that sustainable and long-term growth is very dependent on increased infrastructure spending. And if you look at the plans of government, you'll see that for 2012, the government is planning a considerable, a significant ramping up of the budget for infrastructure and also for capital outlays. But not only that, we also see some would call them baby steps, but I think it's quite significant nonetheless, favorable steps towards improving the governance and the competitive indicators of the Philippine economy. And here, if you look at the frame before you, there have been some appreciable, some material improvement in so far as the governance and competitiveness indicators of the Philippines are concerned. And we're drawing here from the rankings of the Transparency International and also the World Economic Forum. For instance, the Philippines has risen in its World Economic Forum competitiveness ranking by close to 10 places, drawing really on the strength of the macroeconomic environment as well as on some positive gains in institutions, on efficiency as well as technological readiness. So the Philippine outlook for 2012 continues to be respectable. In fact, the government is projecting a growth rate of 5 to 6%. This is slightly higher than the trend growth of the Philippine economy, which is around 4 to 5%. Doctor, I think we have the Reactor, Mr. Doronila is here to join us. So, and while the growth outlook for UNESCAP, as Dr. Basu was discussing, was slightly lower than that at 4.8%. The IMF has it at 4.2%. And recognizing all of these developments, in fact, in 2012, and also earlier on in 2011, the Philippines has received credit rating upgrades from the three major rating agencies. Why do we, what does this upgrade means? It means that this should translate into lower borrowing costs for both the Philippine government as well as Philippine corporates. In fact, our view is that the market has, while we are not yet investment grade, but while the credit rating agencies have not yet considered the Philippines to be investment grade, in fact, the markets have already priced or have already voted the Philippines as investment grade. Because if you look at we have the credit default swaps, and you'll see that this is trading, the Philippine credit default swap spread is trading at levels close within the investment grade countries. Now, I think it's very circumspect to not only look at the fundamental sources of strengths or the buffers, but it's also equally important to also look at the risks and the challenges ahead that the Philippine economy is facing. And we can identify quite a number of these challenges and risks ahead. A key risk, of course, is should the global economic slowdown turns out to be deeper and turns out to be more protracted than what we have anticipated. We, of course, note that there could be the Eurozone crisis has not really been resolved. In fact, there are issues about the intensification of the Eurozone woes, as there are questions about the political acceptability of the austerity measures that have been agreed upon earlier. We also consider the possibility that some of the countries, particularly the advanced countries, the medium-term fiscal consolidation can be waylaid because of this populist backlash. We are also looking at the slowing growth of the Chinese economy, although I think the consensus is that it will be a slowing down rather than a hard landing. As Dr. Basu also talks about the possibility, about the concern about oil supply risks as the events in the Middle East continues to play out. Oil price shocks can be transmitted into the Philippine economy through a number of channels, including, of course, through the inflation channel. We also look at the related risks of the possibility of greater volatility in the financial markets. Again, should this Greek drama, something similar to the Greek drama, continue to play out. So the risk aversion is still very much a risk that we have to be very mindful of. Dr. Basu also talks about the risk emanating from very strong inflows coming from external capital. And indeed, this is a risk that we continue to be mindful of, because not only could it lead to significant inflation pressures, it could also contribute to imbalances in the asset markets, the potential overheating, or what you know as asset price bubble formation. And so some would call it the problem of plenty. And so what we would like is to steer the direction of investments towards the longer term variety rather than through the fickle or very impatient type of capital movements. And finally, and I think it's rightly so, we should also be mindful of the social imperatives, including the impact on unemployment and as well as vulnerable employment. Because while employment could be rising in absolute numbers, we also need to look at the quality of employment. We also need to look at income distribution and also at the levels of poverty. So given all of these considerations, both the challenges as well as the sources of competitive strengths in the Philippine economy, what do all these mean in terms of the policy imperatives to the Bangko Sentral? And I think in my mind, all of these factors indicates that it's important for the Bangko Sentral to be nimble, to be in fact very flexible. Our eyes continue to be very much focused on the inflation fighting objective. We will continue to safeguard price stability, which is the first and foremost the priority of the mandates of the Bangko Sentral. And we will, in terms of our financial policies, we will also continue our efforts to deepen and broaden the reforms needed to maintain the health and the strength of the banking system, and more fundamentally and more broadly, the entire financial system. However, while macroeconomic stability is the end goal, while the monetary policy is providing fundamental support to the economy, it cannot be the only supporter. We cannot only count on monetary policy. We need, in fact, the whole works. We need fiscal policy to accelerate fiscal spending for critical infrastructure investment and social priorities. We also need financial inclusion, and this is not for me a motherhood or an apple pie statement. Financial inclusion is in fact a very strong advocacy of the Bangko Sentral, and so that we are able to bring into the economic mainstream more of our population, more of the unbanked and the underserved. And this will provide a very strong basis for further domestic demand to continue to drive economic growth. Also, national policies are no longer enough. As Dr. Basu has said, we need to be engaged in the international sphere. Regional and global economic cooperation is needed in order to undertake fundamental reforms that can help crisis bystanders like the Philippines weather the inevitable moods and swings of the global financial markets, and including by building good firewalls against the inevitable contagion and also herding behavior of investors. So let me end by identifying three key takeaways. The Philippine economy is not immune. It can be there are quite a number of spillover channels through which all these global shocks can impact on the Philippine economy. The Philippine economy is not immune, but it is well insulated. And also there is some policy space for monetary policy and fiscal policy to provide the support against a very challenging week a very challenging world economic environment. And also, I think because of these good foundations, in part because of very difficult lessons learned in the past, we think that the Philippine economy can deliver faster and higher quality as well as more inclusive growth over the medium term. So if I can say and use this quote, indeed I think history, particularly for the Philippines, has been a very good teacher, and we have been attentive students. I said earlier that I will try to answer the question that I posed in the initial frame. Can the Philippine economy indeed rev up to more than cruising speed? I guess the answer would be yes, but we need better. We need better infrastructure. We need continuing the maintenance of good and sound macroeconomic fundamentals, and also we need good governance. And I guess steps are being taken in those directions. So thank you very much for your very patient attention.
Thank you, Dr. Amador. Our lone reactor is columnist and editorial consultant of the Philippine Daily Inquirer from 1994 to the present. He writes the column Analysis, a political, economic, and social affairs column for the Inquirer. He has a very large following, not only among the general public, but also among the UN system in the Philippines. Please welcome Mr. Amando Doronila.
Start?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Hello. Good morning. Dr. Amador, Mr. Basu. What I want to do is first establish the context of the survey to be able for us to determine where we are coming from, and later I'll focus on, according to me, to my own inclinations, is to give the data on that might be helpful in assessing who benefits from growth. The concern of economists and policymakers is they want to accelerate growth. In the 60s, the prevailing question is, or the prevailing approach was trickle down of growth, and later on it became growth with a distribution. And here I will be really focusing on the questions of equity, questions of beneficiaries of growth, because we're talking of human beings. We are not talking of statistical data of growth. Growth figures are nothing unless you relate it to humans' aspirations, enjoyment of the benefits of growth, especially for the enlargement of the middle classes, which are really not the engines of growth, but the agents of change, political change. So, all right, then I'll go to the hard data. It is just a brief summary. The experts here have discussed that, and the survey can tell you everything. All right? This survey of the growth outlook for Asia Pacific for 2012 is being conducted under the shadow of the growth slowdown felt across its different sub-regions. It presents a pessimistic outlook. However, this report starts on the right foot. It is not saddled by self-deluding forecast. At the very start, the survey tells us that the growth rate of Asia Pacific developing economies declined 7% in 2011 from a robust rate of 8.9% achieved in 2010. The growth rate of the economies of the region is still going downhill. According to the survey, the growth rate of developing economies of the regions forecast to decline further to 6.5% in 2012, with a slackening demand for the region's export in advancing economies. Unfortunately for our region, our growth is tied to the uncertain outlook for the United States and Europe. In other words, we are hostage. Our fate is hostage to the resilience or the recovery of the European U.S. economies. In a speech at the recent ADB Bank annual meeting in Manila, the Columbia University economist Jeffrey Sachs said, growth will remain difficult in the US and Europe, and this could still have an impact on Asia. The region will have to constitute its own growth pool or growth strategies. According to the ESCAP survey, although Southeast Asia is an open sub-region with many of its economies affected severely by the state of the global economy, it is forecast to see a slight increase of growth in the region, in the sub-region, as to 5.2% in 2012 due to the recovery of Thailand following the floods in 2011. With a growth slowdown, inflation in Asia and the Pacific is expected to moderate from 6% to 4.4%. A slowdown in inflation is good for us because a slowdown steals incomes. It makes people poorer. So that's a good development. Despite the slowdown, Asia Pacific will remain the fastest growing region globally as an anchor of stability in the world economy, according to the survey. Against this background of the economic environment of growth in the region, we are led to focus on the issues that affect most directly the Philippine economy, which is that one of the brilliant performers in this region. The issues that concern the Philippines are those related to weak direct foreign investment inflow, low public spending on infrastructure, the problem of job growth with the fall of the unemployment rate, and the serious growing inequalities between and within countries of the region in both in terms of income and social progress. Survey describes this issue as called a cause of great concern and call. According to the survey, the unemployment rate in Asian Pacific has fallen only slightly from 4.3% in 2010 to 4.2% in 2011. In addition to the growing unemployment and inequalities, the survey points out that income inequality in developing Asia Pacific has been rising at a worrying pace, increasing by 25% between 1990s and 2000s. During this period, income inequality rose in 16 out 26 countries for which data are available, including the major economies of the region. The survey says it is clear from these worrying trends that the growth model in the region has to be rebalanced through policies which propagate prosperity by empowering those who have been left behind, says this survey. This observation calls into question the feasibility of the growth approach, popularly called inclusive growth, with nobody left behind. Without the wider distribution of the benefits of growth to the poorer classes, the mantra called inclusive growth becomes a mesmerizing and empty shibboleth to pacify the millions of Asians left behind by growth. The survey calls attention to make growth more inclusive. According to the survey, levels of income inequality has grown by a worrying 15% in developing Asia Pacific economies since the 1990s. Social progress in the region has been hampered by increasing income inequality, according to the survey. The case of the Philippines in particular is particularly troubling. It is a laggard in the growth race. While most governments in the region put primary priority to liberalizing their growth, the Philippines is exuberantly over-politicized. A democratic state where the economy takes a backseat to politics. Its growth is flagging, and yet the political leadership churns the national energy and attention to the direction of political witch hunts aimed at prosecuting or past administration officials accused of corrupt practices in the guise of instituting government. This witch hunt has not produced any economic benefit. It will soon produce more inmates in prisons. It is an economic activity. The economic particulars of the Philippines are summarized in a companion briefing paper, which I commend for serious reading and further discussion. It is superfluous to examine this presentation in detail and the companion paper. So what I did was to introduce the political context under which we're trying to kickstart the growth of our economy, which is now is a measly at 3.7, cut by half in a year from the 7-9% growth. So this is my point. Thank you.
Jeremy. Thank you very much, Mr. Doronila, for offering us your perspectives that are understandable to us laypersons. So we now have time to take questions from the press. Please raise your hand if you want to ask a question.
Clarification, is this simultaneously launched? Is this launching simultaneous elsewhere?
Yes, that's right.
So there's also launching in Bangkok?
There is.
Are there also launches elsewhere?
That's right. In 27 locations, actually 33 locations right now, and 27 locations in Asia Pacific, we're having simultaneous launch.
Okay, thank you. Question oh, it's okay. We have a good banking system. The economy is good. Why are we still poor?
Can you repeat your question, please?
These statistics and your citations look very good for the Philippines. But for us who are down there, we are still poor. So if the president doesn't go into more public spending, what do we expect for 2012, the rest of 2012, and into the elections?
Well, I ended my narrative by saying that there remains to be very significant socio-economic imperatives. And we are equally, I guess the government, in fact, is equally mindful about the many challenges that are being faced by the Philippine economy, including challenges of poverty, of quality employment, of raising or reducing rather the unemployment levels, and also of putting in place measures to reduce income inequality. So the challenges are indeed there. But if you compare the macroeconomic fundamentals, which should underpin stronger, durable, and more inclusive growth, I guess there can be no denying that the macroeconomic fundamentals, basic elements of the equation, are also favorable. So this should, if these are married with stronger infrastructure spending, with better social priorities, then this should lead to better social inclusion, more people being brought into the economic mainstream. So there have been steps, there have been headway, it continues to be work in progress nonetheless. And of course, this will take time, but I guess the initiatives are there. In the case of the Bangko Sentral, for example, if I may take a very perspective from where I sit, price stability is at the very top of the agenda. The Venerable Mr. Doronila said that we have to pay particular attention to that because it helps to preserve the purchasing power, particularly of the poor. And I guess with our commitment to strengthen our inflation-fighting credentials, we are looking at favorable inflation dynamics over the medium term. The central bank also has a very strong financial inclusion advocacy activities, including in microfinance. Financial education is also one of the key planks of the financial inclusion initiatives of the Bangko Sentral. And we hope that altogether, this could deliver results not only in terms of strengthening macroeconomic stability, but also bringing into the fold more of a more inclusive population that could strengthen the drivers for stronger and more broad-based growth.
Dr. Basu, is this how you look at the rest of the emerging markets? Is this the tendency, what governors like is this the general outlook in the rest of the emerging economies for ESCAP region?
Yes. Yes, thank you for the... Can you hear me? Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Hello. Hello. Just hold on for a second. Yeah, I think I can raise my voice and you can hear me. Yes, for the region as a whole, as you mentioned, that there are some headwinds coming because of the external environment. But in general, we're expecting that the emerging economies in the region, including India, China, Russia, we are part of the BRICS, and also Indonesia, Vietnam. There may be some slowdown in 2012, but otherwise, given that we have a good policy space in terms of fiscal balance and also in terms of the monetary policy, overall, we're expecting that the region continue to grow, especially the emerging economies will continue to grow. Maybe in the backdrop that there will be some challenges which are coming out of the Eurozone debt crisis and some uncertainty in the US as well.
I'm just curious because the BRICS are made really heavily populated areas where domestic consumption can really proper domestic growth or even international trade. But what about countries like the Philippines? It cannot be a local domestic consumption led economy, is it?
Philippines is, of course, one of those countries. In the policy review, you will see that we have noted that there is a need to have further public investment, and there is a scope for that. And government, I believe, is willing, as Dr. Amando talked about, to accelerate the public spending policies. And there is scope for it, and as well as the monetary policy, as Dr. Amando also talked about. So there are possibilities, there are interventions that government can take up. And also one very important aspect of the Philippines economy is of the remittances. And that is very robust and buoyant, even given that there are some uncertainty in the Middle East or the political instability, but still what we have noticed that there is increase in the remittances, which is right now more than $20 billion US. And of course also we've seen that the BPO is also providing a lot of good incomes to different parts of the society. So in general, we believe that Philippines has a very robust growth prospects for the years to come. Of course, we have seen there are some difficulties given some international challenges, but otherwise we expect that from 2012 and 2013 onwards, once these investment plans sets up, and there are some other programs I believe that the government has initiated. So in general, and of course also we're talking about the regional cooperation. One of the good things that we have talked about in the report is that the Philippines in general now are reducing its dependence on the Europe and US, and they are going more towards to the Asia Pacific region. So that provides another stimulus for the economy, and we expect that with the reduction in the monetary barriers, more trade facilitation, there is a possibility that other sectors in the economy, not only the electronics or automobile, but other sectors in the economy will also catch up.
Okay. Yes, please.
To Mr. Basu, sir, the report suggests some policies to restrict the capital inflows because of inflationary pressures. Can you give us some specific suggestions on what restrictions may be implemented, say here in the Philippines, and maybe also give some comments from the Senator?
Yes, I think that's a very important question, and it's one of the challenges that we posed in the short term for the region as a whole. A couple of years ago in the ESCAP survey in 2010 to be particular, we recommended some specific policy measures to control short-term capital flows, especially the private equities and short-term credit inflows as well. And I believe that many of the countries, including Philippines, have undertaken some of those policies to protect this volatility. Uncertainties of this short-term capital flows. So we're still recommending, we're continuing with the policy advice to the governments that we need to have this sort of policy measures, given that large amount of poor and vulnerable in the region, and of course also it has implication to the financial market. The sentiments of investors are very, very important for the region, and countries like Philippines are also are going to be affected if there are some negative sentiments among the investors. So we continue to feel that we need to have this sort of policy measures, but we have to be also be mindful about the way we impose those measures and kind of inflows that we're going to have those sort of measures. So we need to have the trial that Dr. Amando talked about, and we continue to propose that. Maybe you can add.
Thank you. I guess, Michelle, by way of responding to the surges in capital flows, which we expect to continue, again, given the risk-on, risk-off dynamics and the intensification of the financial crisis, sovereign debt financial crisis in Europe, we could expect some more capital inflows going our way. I guess our line is really that we will continue to adopt a variety of measures, a deep bench of instruments, because we think that this would render the economy more flexible. But in direct answer to the question of whether we should be restricting capital flows, I guess here we would hew to we've been using, I can call it market-friendly or market-oriented prudential measures, and these have worked to mitigate the harmful consequences of very strong capital flows. So we will continue to employ the same instruments. We will continue to let the exchange rate bear part of the adjustment. We will continue to build international reserves. We will continue to use monetary policy in order to help us also moderate the negative effects of foreign capital. But I guess amidst all of this, the best defense would really be through continued and disciplined macroeconomic policies, so that we will be attracting the more patient, the longer term, those flows that can really lead to job creation, rather than attracting capital flows that are very fickle, that would move very easily from shore to shore at the slightest bit of negative news. So the best defense against very strong movements and the threats of reversals of capital flows would be to continue promoting responsible and disciplined macroeconomic policies.
Okay, maybe the last question.
I just want to ask if the information is correct. In terms of the figures on the GDP, if you look at 210 and 211, for example, the 211 figures would, of course, be based on the inflated rate. So therefore, it is really very interesting to see that you have also enclosed a table of the inflation in the selected countries, so that we should balance between countries the rate of inflation and the rate of GDP growth, which is precisely, I think, the theme of equalizing prosperity or sharing prosperity, because the more stable inflation is, then the better, because the most hurt are the poorest segment. So in a sense, we should really congratulate Central Bank for having been consistently guarding the inflation rate.
Thank you very much, sir. We take that as a challenge for us to do better, and I'm also very strong in letting you know about not only our adherence to the price stability objective, but also to our financial inclusion objectives. Just last 2 weeks ago, we presented the results of our consumer finance survey, and it was really quite revealing to know that so many of our population, at least we looked at the household responses, and 8 out of 10 households are not using the banking system. They are unbanked, underserved. And so there's that, but partly of course, and we should recognize it, poverty was playing the role. But there's also a lot of things that I think initiatives that the central bank and the other government agencies can do to bring into the fold all of these underbanked, underserved population so that they can be better protected, for example, in terms of their very hard-earned earnings.
Only two, I think.
Two out of, yes, two. So 8 out of 10 are effectively excluded. So what would be the good responses? It would be to financial education for one. Consumer protection is also something that we should raise the level of consumer protection, financial consumer protection in the Philippines. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, before we end, we would just like to get a few minutes of statement from our reactor, Mr. Doronila. Just to recap, sir, your thoughts. May we ask you for like a 2-minute reaction to what has been said in the open forum?
Yes, previous speakers are experts whose assessments are unassailable. They are very authoritative in describing the state of the economy. Besides, the ESCAP is an independent institution. It's not an instrument for political propaganda, and that's why they are better trusted in making presentations on really serious economic matters than governments that thrive on seductive slogans as "Patuloy na daan" and good governance. I've never yet seen a government that has really boosted economic growth by the sheer force of sloganeering. Tell me an evidence. Can you tell me in the instant history where sloganeering has propelled or driven real economic growth or made the poor less poor? It's only here.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Doronila. Now, we would like to request Mr. Basu to present the Certificate of Appreciation to Mr. Doronila. Sir, can you please accept the certificate? Okay, so thank you very much. As an expression of our gratitude to you for coming very early, we are offering crossover buffet. Thank you very much. Please present your stuff to the head waiter.
I want to present a copy to the mother and share a photo session.
Okay. Sorry guys, is it alright? Excuse me, to the camera persons, could you please take a picture of Mr. Basu presenting the survey report to Dr. Amador? This is a request from ESCAP.